Trick or treat.
Wow, happy Halloween. Let me see if I can guess what you are. You're a clown and you... backside of a horse?
We're politicians.
Do you live, eat, and sleep the hotel industry? Looking to brush up on your game? You've come to the right place. Welcome to No Vacancy, the hospitality industry's #1 podcast, with your host, Glenn Hausman.
Hey everybody, Glenn Hausman here, and I am excited and delighted to have each and every one of you here with me every single week as we do this No Vacancy podcast. Man, I feel so lucky, I feel so blessed, and I am happy to have every single one of you along as we explore the entire world of hospitality and all the things that are going to make you more money and make your guests happier at the same time. Remember, you've got one life, so let's blaze on here. And I want you guys to reshape your expectations of what an FF&E distribution partner for hospitality should be. That's why I want you to make Alamo Hospitality your go-to partner to simplify those FF&E deployments. I talk about these guys every single week. And one of the things I want to talk to you about today is outdoor furniture and recreation and stuff like that. I think a lot of times we're starting to think of outdoors a little too much as the public spaces that are outdoors, and I've been thinking about how much I love and covet a great balcony experience. Yeah, I use covet. I like it that much, right? Forget coveting neighbors' wives. I covet balconies. You know what I'm saying over here? Because I like to sit down. I like to relax. I like to have that sunshine and that wonderful, incredible breeze hit me over. But one of the things that I don't like is horrifically bad outdoor furniture. A lot of these hotels have great outdoor space, all this balcony space, and then I'm stuck out there with these little crappy plastic chairs and a little crappy plastic table in between that ruins the entire outdoor experience for me. Why would you go through all of that effort to have people come to your hotel, build this great hotel, have this outdoor space, and then cheap out with this icky, crappy, junky-looking outdoor furniture? Now, I don't know how you think about it, but me, I like to spend a lot of hours out there. And if I'm working with my producer, Jeff, we like to sit out there, and we like to talk, and we like to work, and we like to chill out. So if you have the space, spend a few dollars more and get some decent outdoor furniture. Would you? Would you please? Because it makes our lives a lot better. It increases the overall excitement that people have around your place. And I guarantee that if you've got a great outdoor in-room experience, or is that out-room, in-room experience, I don't know, you got to figure out that phrase, it'll be much better. So when you're thinking about your outdoor stuff, go check out the good folks over at Alamo Hospitality, because they're working with brands such as Cape Soleil, Cambridge, Hanover, Lasco, Keystone, Samsung, and Peerless AV, which has got these awesome outdoor televisions. I want to get one of those for my backyard for next summer here at the Hausman Resort, a pool club and smokehouse, because I think that'd be really freaking awesome to have a great television and sound system out there and watch some great concerts outside by the pool and all of that kind of stuff. Now, that sounds like a great time for me. Okay, so that's enough with my shameless plugs over there. But to be truthful, I've been thinking about this outdoor thing a lot, and it really is something that's been bothering me a tremendous amount. Now, another thing that has been frustrating me a tremendous amount, and I've been seeing it a lot, is when people are promoting their events at their hotels, and they've got the calendar for a month. And now, since this is coming out in October, and this show is set to launch the last weekend of October, I'm standing there in the bathroom, and this hotel is smart enough to give people at the urinals a calendar of events to read so they can see all of the things that are going on. However, it's actually the fourth week of October as I'm looking at this calendar. And I got all of these events from October 1st all the way through the first 3 weeks of the month that are over. And the only future events are the ones for the next 7 or 8 days. What's going to happen on November 1st? I'm thinking all of these bands that play early in the month, they get screwed because everybody's in this habit of putting up these monthly calendars, and they only change them at the end of the month. So if you have an event that's November 30th, you've got people peeing and thinking about going to your event the entire month long. If you got an event at the beginning of the month, you've only got a couple of days, if any time at all, to promote that particular event. So why are people doing monthly calendars once a month? Why not? This is such a stupid, simple idea, and I can't believe I never see it, and I can't believe it took me until I'm almost 49 years old to come up with this idea. But freak, man, just put up a new calendar every 2 weeks that has 30 days of events, or even do it weekly if you've got enough guts to do it. Do you have enough guts to do it? I think you certainly do. I mean, think about it this way. If you change the calendar out on the 15th, you don't have to worry about seeing all that first half of the month stuff. You could start promoting the first half of the following month's activities that you have going on at your property. Just seems to make much sense to me. I don't know why people do it, but then again, I don't know why I have so many problems with itty-bitty tiny faucets still in the bathrooms where I can't wash my hands without hitting the porcelain sink. But we don't need to get me too angry right now, because I would like us all to have a moment of zen here on the No Vacancy podcast. Okay, so for today's show, it's going to be a good one, but if you haven't subscribed yet, text the word hotel to 66866 to get our newsletter. If you just want to get the podcast delivered straight to your Apple Podcasts, Google Play, whatever, go check it out on those sites. Easy enough. Type in No Vacancy, and it will come up. No Vacancy with Glenn Hausman. You'll see it there. Also, follow us on Facebook. Follow us on LinkedIn. We're putting up a lot of great video interviews now, and we're really getting to the movement with that. We're having a great time with that. I've applied for that LinkedIn Live. Hopefully, I'll get it. I got my fingers crossed. That'll take us up to the next level. But we're having so much fun creating all this great content out there, and I'm afraid that all of you folks listening to it right now, you're missing all of this great visual content, too. I think you got to clean up that dial of a dog poop, listener. I know you don't like to, but you got to go get it. Yeah, a lot of people listen to this show while they're walking the dog, so, I thought I'd put that in there as a helpful reminder to pick up that dog poop, right? Curb your dog, as they said when I lived in New York City. All right, so this has all been wonderful. Now I'm on my way because we're going to get to two great interviews, one with Charlestowne Hotel and Johnathan Capps. That'll be the first one, and he handles revenue management for the company. We're going to talk a little bit about the dynamic about how he sees his business in secondary cities where they focus upon. We'll talk about Charleston, Myrtle Beach, Savannah, cool stuff like that, how they handle supply growth in those particular cities, stuff that's really going to be helpful to you. And then after the commercial break, we've got our first interview with the CEO of the AHLA. That's Chip Rogers. Of course, he's been on the show many times when he was in charge of a hoe over there. But now he's over at the AHLA, and we're going to be talking about the issues that are really important to him and also learn a little bit about what he's thinking about his job now that he's over there at the American Hotel and Lodging Association. And we're going to be focused a little bit on human trafficking today. And one note about that is every airport I go into now, I even go into the restrooms, there's human trafficking signs over there. So it's really been incredible to see how all of a sudden in the last few years, airports and hotels have really turned everything around to make it nearly impossible to miss the fact that this thing is happening. And there's lots of signage, lots of opportunities, lots of different ways to help folks that might be trapped in this horrible situation. We're going to learn all about that coming right up after the commercial break. But first, of course, we got the interview with Johnathan Capps. Thank you guys so much for being here with me each and every week. I absolutely love it. And please like our Facebook page, follow us on LinkedIn, tell your friends about it, and just help putting the good word out there. Sorry, I'm getting a little choked up there because I always hate to do the ask, but we gotta keep this show moving. We gotta get more people involved. I want to keep building this movement that we have here going because it's so terrific, and I'm just so heartened by all the love and positive energy I get from all of you. And I want to make sure that I can continue to get that positive energy out to you for more years to come. All right, enough of the talking. On to the interviews. Thanks very much. We'll see you next time. And remember, you've got one life. Blaze on, babies. All right, I'm with Johnathan Capps now, and he is over at Charlestowne Hotels, where he's the Vice President of Revenue. Johnathan, the market is changing so much these days. It's getting super challenging out there. So for a guy that's in charge of revenue, you got to really be focused, I think, these days, don't you think?
Locked in so hard.
Right?
It's crazy.
Yeah, I know. It's hard to just jump right into it without having any, I like to sometimes smooth out the edges, get people really comfortable before I start asking all those tough questions. But the fact is, it's getting much harder to push rates there right now. And competition is swarming from all sides. There's a lot more hotel development out there. And it's got to make it more difficult, even for a company such as yours, which has consistently some of the best products in the entire country, according to publications such as Travel and Leisure.
Yeah, it's a constant battle, and even when you look at it from a revenue perspective, but a team perspective, operationally to deliver on something that the value is being judged every day against new supply and new competitors, and even supply that's coming in that they're saying, we want to build a hotel just like yours, just down the street, right? That's what people are saying to us.
Yeah.
So we're going into it with that mindset of how do we create value, how do we deliver value, and how do we keep driving those profits the owner want to see.
So what does that mean to you then, create value? Does it, because the way I'm seeing is that I think that customers are willing to pay what they're willing to pay, but it's really about how they feel about the price they're paying as opposed to the dollar amount that's pegged to it.
Yeah, for us, you got to do that throughout the cycle of the customer, right? So we have to give them something. We feel like there's got to be some tangibility at the entrance, when they're researching the product, when they're considering to buy the product, and when the product's being delivered. So, we look at things now like what are benefits that someone's going to see on the site that's going to get them a little further? What can we highlight that they're going to get at the property that's going to take them a little further? And then at the property, how do you deliver on that, right? How do you do a turn down a little differently? How do you do the arrival experience where it's not a check-in with your name and room number and a traditional key packet? And those are all things we look at in pretty stark details to kind of fine-tune what that is and what that whole value experience is like.
Right. Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense to me and a smart approach. So, I mean, the way that I see it right now is something like 114 of the last 116 months we've seen RevPAR gains. So we're really pushing up against the immutable law of mathematics and physics. You can only push these things so much at some time. So you need to start thinking about that overall value for the customer. But what you're telling me is you're starting to think a little bit differently. It's not just about what they're paying for the room night. It's kind of about how much money they're going to be spending with you for the entire experience at one of the properties operated by Charlestowne.
Yeah, total revenue and, what that experience is costing, right? We in the revenue side, you're always going to talk about channel cost and, what that acquisition cost is. But the acquisition cost can shrink, but what if the delivery or the cost per occupied room grows, right? So you're kind of working on both sides of the swing there. And that's where the total picture carries through of like, okay, we're going to give you a $10 F&B credit, but you're spending $50, right? There's a good trade-off there, and that's by channel. So we really try to dial into that because, as you were mentioning, I think as that RevPAR pendulum continues to grow, and you're worried about where does it stop and shrink, is also the supplies are right up against that, right? So we may be the old player on the block when that number stops, and we often say the easy question is we can't be the ones to highlight new or something that these newer hotels can have. So it makes it even more competitive in that sense.
So one of the things that I found with you, Johnathan, is you seem to have a lot of success in secondary markets. And now, as a lot of the big markets like New York, Chicago, and LA seem to be getting chock full of hotels, developers are focusing on secondary markets. You guys have excelled there. How do you see it? How is it kind of changing the formula for what you're doing?
Yeah, in some ways, we like the secondary market growth, right? It's in our management company and our style, like that's where we want to grow. There's opportunity there. And the independent sector seems to be following that right along, right? So, you look at like the boutique lodging peers reporting 6%, growth for independent lodging. That's right in our wheelhouse, right? And these independents seem to be, that's a good spot for them. Why? I think some of these primary markets have huge hotels. I think the barrier entry being a little bit less, the opportunities being there in some of these secondary markets seems to be working out. Now, in some of our primary secondary markets, it is more of a concern because is always in the top 10 for supply growth. We could be in trouble there because if everyone is making a copycat of some of our upper upscale or luxury stuff, well, we're just entering new product up, and if we're not managing it and they're the new guys on the block, we could be in a little bit of trouble there.
Right. Yeah, you certainly can. So you got to make sure that you're always in fighting mode to combat that supply growth, and you've really got to focus on revenue management, sales, and really strong marketing as well as the customer experience to ensure that some of the newer folks don't become those interlopers and steal away your business. So how do you work through all of that to make sure that even when that sexy new property opens down the road, that you're not going to let them take advantage of you?
Yeah, I think we're going through a lot of those conversations now, right? When you're in the middle of a budget bind, it's something that you discuss. It's put into assumptions, and for us, we kind of look at it as like, while keeping rate integrity, right? Important first from us from a revenue management perspective. It's where can we get a little bit of a head? Where in the past where we may have cruised a little bit and not had to participate in a certain channel or not had to do a certain marketing campaign, we go a little bit heavier here. We go a little bit on the offensive, and we get out ahead of them. Our groups, our corporate, our repeat stuff. You gotta put a little bit more towards them. We say sometimes you got to get them a little bit more sugar, right? Like, you got to go to them, and you got to make sure that relationship's tight, because you know what's going to happen is they're going to give them something. They have a lot of money put towards that pre-opening, and they got a little bit of a room to discount, right? Because they haven't necessarily established integrity, though that integrity is there from a sense of scale. Maybe they can kind of do that opening rate game, and they can play that. So we try to get out ahead of that as far as possible, and I think mostly too with ownership, right? You want your owners, you want your leadership to really one particular property is going to impact your property. So we're not getting through the middle of next year and we're like, hey, they stole our shirt. Now we got to react. That's a year too late.
Absolutely. So that's an interesting philosophy to me, is that you really got to play that offensive game. How much of that is psychological mindset versus actually just going out and doing things? I see this all the time. People psych themselves out. It puts them into an emotionally negative position, and then they're not really prepared to get out there and do it.
Yeah, I think you said it earlier. For us, it is big time psychological, because we like to play the in thanks for the credit earlier. We do have a fair amount of award-winning properties.
Amazing. It's an amazing portfolio, and I don't mean to cut you off, but they really have such great properties. So it's interesting to see what your perspective is, being at the top where everybody's trying to nip at your heels, right?
Yeah, and sometimes you got to just stand strong, right? And you say our product, our service, we think and that, I put a note, because it's funny. A lot of people will be like, oh, do your SWOT analysis, do this stuff. We take that to another level, right? Because as I said to you a minute ago, if you really look at that incoming product, and we have the amenities that we think line up to our guest, we think we can run our same numbers we ran previously, then we don't budge, right? We're going to hold strong. We're not going to let their rate patterns, we're not going to let their entrance to the market. And we may let a little bit of shrink in there, but not trying to introduce too much or do things too differently. I mean, the hotel was built on that. The philosophy is built on that. The execution is built on that. So if you overreact, I think there's a bigger miss there that could happen, right? You could shrink way back, or we've seen a property open where it takes 5 years to stabilize, and we don't want to follow that if they've misstepped there.
Yeah, that is a long period of time to get a property up and running. So I got to say, when you're positioned in this type of the market, like I said, you have all these people nipping at your heels. It sounds like there's a lot of challenges out there. What about some of the pros? Is there a wisdom to, like in Las Vegas, where you have like that cluster effect and more people see the property, so then all the market, so more people come? How do you see something positive out of what's going on?
Of the secondary markets are a lot there for me. I think, I mentioned earlier, I think the barrier to entry for developers, one of our recently have been an adaptive reuse, right? You go into some of these older cities with a building that wasn't originally designed as a hotel, and then you can turn a bank into a hotel. You can turn an old Asheville for us to a hotel, and build a great product and a great story, right? In the independent world, again, they're built on stories, and I think a lot of these sub-markets have those stories. But I also think that leads to other, we're not the only discipline or only, sector that has that, right? I think we see that from a lot of cities, from like, the restaurant/food world, right? You have chefs who want to come back and work in their hometown, or want to do something cool, or want to even build a family in these submarkets where they don't want to work in the city or the competition's high. And I think even now, a lot of tech companies going in and putting headquarters in these secondary cities, they want to more build these secondary cities up than sit on top of these major cities. I mean, Charleston's a good example of that, right? We've had a Boeing plant right behind it, and it's just building the city out. I mean, in some aspect as a local, I'm sure that there's, some locals that say the impact looks reverse for them because, you add traffic, both in the support for hotels just builds our business.
Right. That's fascinating. So in a lot of ways, there's even more advantages to these secondary cities, and there might be in some of those tier one cities. I think a lot of hotel companies get infatuated with that tier one city mindset. And I love the idea that you could build great, strong businesses in a lot of secondary cities, which I wouldn't even call them secondary cities anymore. They all seem to be up on the move. They all seem to be experiencing great influx of population growth as some of the major urban centers become way too expensive. Now, for the folks of you that are watching this video version of it, I'm wearing my Brooklyn shirt. And I lived in Brooklyn for a lot of years, but I personally felt that city life was getting to be too emotionally complex for me in the sense that there's always energy and noise, and my apartment was small and my kids started to get bigger, and it wasn't the kind of lifestyle that I wanted to experience. So I could see why a lot of people would want to go work for that company that's in a secondary city. Makes a lot of sense to me and really helps recharacterize the neighborhood to make your hotels even more successful.
And that's what we're seeing, right? I think even secondary cities and take some of the a great market for us as well. And a lot of those in those secondary cities is a lot of that secondary supply and the ability to want to do it or wanted to revitalize a town. Bristol, that for us, there's Hamilton, New York, there's we're going to do something at Colby College. Like all these are part of a town revitalization that's, looking to build some, lease space, some quality parks. So there's a bigger picture there that I think could do a lot of that. And I think we're seeing, same as what you just said, right? There's a want to get out of the city a little bit. Sometimes it's to have an escape from this business from, and otherwise it's the workforce is, somewhat decent for us sometimes because people have left the city to be stationed out there, basically.
Right, and I think the one point that you made before I started going crazy and ranting about Brooklyn was that adaptive reuse. And when you have some of these secondary cities, perhaps those main streets have kind of been on decline for a while, and now with people coming back to these secondary urban areas, there's an opportunity to revitalize these places, and a great hotel and an adaptive reuse structure that has the character of the community within it, I think is a great win for the developers and the operators, and in particular the customers as well.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a primary city, but another example of that is like the Hotel Claremont in Atlanta for us, right? Like, the building had a name and a story that, like, when we go through the branding process, there's a style guide to create and there's, a logo to revitalize, but like that story, I mean, there was people knocking down the door to kind of just want to learn what was going to happen with that hotel years before it was started to be worked on. So, I mentioned Asheville earlier. We got something down in St. Augustine that, there's Civil War history to that property that in building that property, the developers were finding things, and as we've grown, people ask about the history and gives it charm. There's such a charm. I mean, not to say, we have a little bit of a branded supply. We're 10% in managing our total supply, but, you go from Hilton to Hilton and, there's something the same about all of them, and you're going to get a very similar stay, but they're starting to creep into that market too, right? There's a lot of Curios out there. Marriott's doing the same thing. There's lifestyle brands, and then there's soft brands that are being built that are allowed to do the same thing. So I think, and as they creep into those secondary markets too, I mean, Graduate Hotels is a great example of that in their sense of going into the college. Yeah, and they're going to the college markets as well, and that's a lot of secondary cities. Yeah.
So you've got opportunities, you've got challenges, just like every other business in any other period of time. How do you see the next few years for you in ensuring that even if the market softens a little bit, and I'm by no means predicting a crash in the hospitality market. I think there's been too many societal changes that will keep that from happening. Black swan exception, blah, blah, blah. But, how do you see negotiating what are the new rules of hospitality going in the future? Because this softening the market is going to be very different than any other softening or downturn we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I think, kind of how we approach the supply growth in those markets, similar to approaching that from a sense of a softening market, right? It's you can't overreact, but you gotta have some things in place to be able to do some things a little bit more competitively. You also got to be ready to cut, right? So it's add and cut. Where can you get a little bit more competitive? Where can you do some things and spend some things that you haven't done before? Where can you tighten your belt from the revenue management perspective? I think while we don't want to go back and add the world of, putting AAA discounts and moving advanced purchase to 3 days out. So, everyone's getting 3 levels of discounts inside of a 3-day window. There's some things to tighten up there, and there's some spends. And I think, for us, especially in the independent world, the barrier of participating in a lot of programs has shrunk too, right? So where in the past you'd be like, these secondary markets are heavy leisure, and you're going to rely on leisure travel. And as the economy softens, that did soften for us in previous periods. But what happens now is, like, as those corporations, as I mentioned earlier, a Volvo or a Boeing or in any of these markets, some of this corporate businesses out there, we have access to that, right? We can participate in corporate RFPs. We can be in bigger programs with the same access, close to the same access as the brands, and get in those programs, right? So I think some of it is that it's how do we play a little bit more in the corporate market if needed in some of these? How do we, get a little bit more group? And that is the thing. I think in these secondary markets, sometimes you lack space, meeting space, convention space, where, and that's what we've seen a little bit. We've seen some of these markets start to lose a little bit in the group pace area, and then we have to pick it up a little bit on the other sides.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. So this has been an interesting conversation, but I'm curious, how does somebody wind up as vice president of revenue? Because that's not really the type of thing that we talk about when we're in like second grade. I mean, it's like, of course, it was like astronaut, cop, vice president of revenue. I know that they were all in the mix back in the second grade, but realistically, how did you find your path down this?
Yeah, I was hoping for NBA basketball player in that second grade, but I got a little of the height, just not the skills. My route was sales. I had a sales knack. Luckily for me, I grew up in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. It's hospitality is almost everyone knows. So I got a taste of hotels in high school. My mother's been in it her whole life, and I just had that sales vernacular. I always wanted to be front of customer. I thought, selling stuff was a success. You drove the revenue, and which counters or, goes with the revenue aspect. But, I got a good chance to move as just a sales coordinator out of college, and then start testing and playing with the way group rates were quoted in a market, in the South Florida market. And then it's funny, I started on the brand side. IHG was beta testing their Perform product at the time, and our company was chosen. I got to beta test that product and start tasting revenue management a little more, and I was like, man, I love this. So worked my way into revenue management, and then revenue management up, started learning a little bit of marketing and mixed those together. And here at Charlestowne Hotels, after almost 9 years, kind of in a leadership position that I really appreciate and enjoy, because now I can, take others along that same path. Someone I work with here, reached out to me when I was a revenue manager here, and he was at the front desk of one of our hotels and was like, I'm interested in revenue management. And now he's a director of revenue management with us. So it's the part that I enjoy now in growing the field and kind of talking about the field, because it's ever changing, and that's fun.
Ever changing, and only in the last 10 years or so has it become I think, at the forefront, great career opportunity. It's so funny how the business back in the day didn't see this as a profession, but what you do is a linchpin to the success of everybody's hotel businesses. It's crazy to me that only recently we realized that guys like you deserve the utmost respect.
Well, we appreciate the love for the field. It is funny to see that, because we work in a market here with a hospitality school at the College of Charleston that their MBA program has a revenue management discipline. And for the last 4 years, we've taken some of that. So it does feel great that like there's a focus on that. There's literature on this that they're putting through the curriculum, and it's a hands-on workforce where you can get in there. And what I love about the industry and especially the revenue management discipline is like working with like, let's say like an ideas, right? Like ideas on the revenue management system side is a great system, but to see them, working with colleges in the same way, right? Like they have a college program where they're putting the revenue management system in front of these MBA programs to grow this discipline and to educate this discipline where, now we're getting, MBAs out of school who are ready to be analysts and move to revenue managers pretty quickly. And it's exciting because, don't tell our operations team that, but, we feel like there's a big impact there. And in our world, in these smaller hotels, it's tighter. There's that much little room for margin.
Right. Yeah, and totally. And since Johnathan brought up ideas, I released on October 16th of this year a great conversation I had as a bonus podcast on the No Vacancy channel with Klaus Kohlmeyer, their chief evangelist over there. We talk all about the issues in revenue that you need to be thinking about. So be sure to download that show. But Johnathan, I want to ask you a little piece of advice that you could give folks that are coming up through that sales channel right now, the folks that are doing that job every single day at the property that might be too young to have actually been through a time when things weren't getting better and better and better every single month. What kind of advice do you have from them to make sure that they can continue to be freaking awesome as time goes on?
Yeah, I think a little bit of patience, knowing that our CEO says it great, right? Like everything cycles. We go through cycles. I think that's when it kind of filters some out, right? You got to be the one willing to work hard. You got to put in a little bit more diligence. And I also think we said it earlier, but remaining true to the product, to the positioning, right? Someone's going to do it. Someone's going to, maybe they pressed the wrong button, maybe they didn't. Someone's going to, drop there drastically and, kind of keeping that integrity. We say that a lot in our business, but I think it can't be said enough that, there's a value to your product, right? And we work in a market that, and I grew up in the market, right? The Star years ago said the most seasonal market from ADR is Myrtle Beach, right? We see them go from 300s in the summer to 39 in the off season. Everyone knows that, right? But there wasn't a need to go to 39. It was like at one point someone went to 39, and because the whole a lot of the product there is connected to a couple groups, everyone went there, right? But that's not the value of that product. The value of that product was determined that it's this level. Now, when the beach season does get cold and the beach isn't as valuable, yes, that drops a little bit, but it doesn't need to drop that much. So I think really determining where the levels of seasonality are and where the levels of economic value are that drop you a little bit. But the panic button is not there. It should never be there. And you're going to lose a few customers. It's not going to drive demand.
Right. And I think just to summarize that, don't ever trade rate for occupancy, because it's just going to be a lose-lose in the long run, is my hunch as a non-revenue management professional.
Yeah, no, you got it. You summed it up well.
Awesome. Johnathan, I really appreciate you talking to me. How can we find you? How can we find Charlestown? This is your chance for a great shameless plug.
Yeah, I hope we covered secondary markets well, and our other markets, from colleges to condos. Charlestowne Hotels as a third-party manager, covering all markets, and really love the independent sector with a few brands tied in there. So it's charlestownehotels.com, Charlestown with an E, hotels with an S .com to learn more, to reach out. Check us out.
Beautiful. I love this company. They do some great stuff. And as I said at the beginning of the conversation, a lot of their hotels reach the uppermost echelon for the great hotel industry magazines and the major consumer trades as well. It always amazes me that you guys have such great product out there. Only thing missing is me staying in them. I've got to change that at some point, Johnathan. I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank all of you guys for listening. And when we come back after this commercial break, we've got another amazing interview. So stick around, and we'll be right back.
Have a question for your host, Glenn? Tweet him now at Traveling Glenn. No Vacancy, the hospitality industry's #1 podcast. We'll be right back.
Hey everybody, Glenn here. So listen, a while back, I told you about the Red Collection. You know, Red Roof's soft brand that was developed after comprehensive research into what today's traveler truly desires. Well, offering you a great opportunity to affordably expand your portfolio in the heart of the cities you love. For a limited time, that opportunity is miles beyond affordable because Red Roof is offering free royalties for 5 years to qualified franchisees completing an application by December 31st, 2019. That's December 31st, 2019. Don't sit around. Get it done. The Red Collection is a fast-growing group of upper-mid-scale unique hotels, each inspired by their city's vibe and culture. What's more, every property has its own distinctive name, customized property enhancement plan, and brand standards based on consumer wants rather than design mandates. That's the way it should be. And because all this is backed by Red Roof, well, you'll gain the advantage of their owner-operator perspective as well as loyalty rewards programs with more than 3 million members. And that just happens to be the richest in class and least expensive for franchisees. Plus, you'll be working with a company with a franchisee satisfaction rate of 90%. How about that? To learn more about, get this, 5 years free royalty, 5 years royalty free with the Red Collection, contact Matt Hostetler, Red Roof Senior VP of Development and Franchising today. I mean, right now. Stop walking the dog, stop running on that treadmill, stop doing what you're doing, and call 713-576-7426 or email mhostetler at redroof.com. That's MHOSTETLER at redroof.com. Thanks for listening. Back to the show. Hey everybody, Glenn Hausman here, the No Vacancy Podcast, and I am with the one and only Chip Rogers of AHLA. How are you, sir?
Glenn, it is, as always, great to be with you.
It is great to be with you, Chip. I think that I'm excited here because this is our first official interview since you took over the AHLA. I know it's not, it hasn't been just yesterday or anything like that, but what is it, 8 months now?
It's been like 9, and I've been waiting on your call, and it never came. So I said I'm going to have to call Glenn, and here we are.
So what was the transition like moving from AHOA to AHLA? And but I know we've talked off mic about what a cool opportunity this was for you.
Look, the transition from a professional standpoint was really as easy as it could be. I have an amazing team at AHLA that has made everything easy. But you know, in my prior experience, I had already worked with this team on a daily basis. We were working on many of the same issues. That continues today. And because I have the connection back with AHOA, it has been very easy. Now, as an individual with a family and everything, moving from Atlanta to Washington, D.C. was a little bit more of a challenge than the actual professional transition. D.C. is a great place. Don't get me wrong. Houses are a little more expensive than Atlanta.
I live in New York, so I can sympathize with what you've been through. But I guess it is right because you were already traveling. You're up in D.C. a whole lot anyway. But moving that family component is a very difficult thing to do. And I remember I had to move my family from Brooklyn out to Long Island at one point, and it really created a lot of upheaval. And having to get the whole family behind you in your career is it's an interesting thing that you have to do because you really want to do what's best for you, but you want to do what's best for your family, but you want to do what's best for your career and all of that kind of stuff.
It's quite a sales job.
Right.
and it's very difficult to sell to the people who know you best because they can see through all your angles. But so things are good.
All right, so I have a feeling now because you moved from AHOA to AHLA, the combination now is more of a 1 + 1 = 3 kind of thing because you know that organization so intimately. You helped them really come up so significantly with the voice on Capitol Hill. Now I feel like you're able to take all of that bottled up energy, combine it with what you're doing over at AHLA, and really create an amazing voice that's going to have to be heard on Capitol Hill.
Well, look, I think we saw that just a couple of weeks ago at the Legislative Action Summit, which AHLA does jointly with AHOA. And it's something that myself and Catherine Lugar actually planned out many years ago.
Right, and Catherine Lugar is the former CEO of the AHLA.
Exactly. Thanks for pointing that out. I thought she was a household name. She is around my house.
Well, for sure. But there are a lot of listeners that are not as intimately involved.
So we kind of planned that out and really dreamed of how large can we make this, how influential can we make this, and then we saw that manifest itself just a couple of weeks ago. We had about 500 folks come to Washington, D.C., and you were there, and you see the impact that it makes on lawmakers when you have all of these folks from one industry coming to their offices and saying, look, here's what we do in our industry. Here's the American dream we're creating for people, the jobs, the opportunities. And what we need from you as our elected officials is to, first of all, don't put artificial hurdles in our way. Don't stop us from doing what we're doing well, but help us, because that's what you're there for. And I think that unified message, both from the AHLA side, the AHOA side, the entire industry coming together, has never been stronger than it is today.
It has never been stronger than it is today. And I say that really to really underscore this point, because I was, like you said, at the Legislative Action Summit just a few weeks ago as we're recording this interview, and I felt the difference. It was palpable. I could not believe the congressional representatives that you got to come down and spend time there. And what were they, only back in session like a couple of days?
Right.
So they were like crazy cuckoo busy, but they still are making time now for the hotel industry.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at where we were a few years ago as an industry, and we were scheduling these meetings with members of Congress. What would typically happen is we would go into the meeting and we would meet with their chief of staff or someone even lower than that on kind of the hierarchy inside of the congressional office. In these meetings, you saw again and again and again, we're actually meeting with the member of Congress, which is what our industry deserves. It's what the attendees to that meeting deserve, but it helps us cut straight through with the message to the person that's ultimately going to have to cast the vote.
Right.
And that is so critical. Our story is an amazing story to tell if we just get the opportunity to tell it. And going to Capitol Hill with about 500 folks strong helps us tell that story.
So what is it like when you go up to Capitol Hill in 2019 compared to 5 or 10 years ago? How is it different in terms of people listening to you, and how effectively you're able to get across those messages?
Well, it's night and day, because back then it was really making introductions. Today it is continuing the conversation. And if you think about just a few years ago, we would have to explain to your average member of Congress, someone who owns a Marriott Hotels doesn't own all Marriott Hotels, right? There are these things called franchisees, and a vast majority of our entire industry is made up of the franchisor-franchisee relationship. So these are small business owners that live and work in their community, because it's so easy as a lawmaker to cast aspersions on some faceless, almost nameless global corporate entity. You can't do that when the guy or the woman who owns the hotel actually lives in your community, goes to school, their kids go to school with your kids. And that's the story we're trying to remind them of, is these are small businesses in local communities. And when you as a lawmaker pass legislation, it's going to impact them in that community.
Yeah, it's a strange thing to me that not just lawmakers, but the average citizen doesn't really understand that these are franchise businesses. I mean, there are a gajillion franchise businesses out there. I don't understand the disconnect that's happening, but I'm glad that you're able to really deliver that message. So you have risen a lot in terms of visibility on Capitol Hill in the last decade, but there's been a lot of turnover, as is typical in Congress. So what happens when somebody is first elected and it's your first time talking to them? Are you finding that it's still that same educational process from 10 years ago, or have they become more savvy and sophisticated, generally speaking?
No, I would actually argue that the challenge we face is even more difficult, because the type of person getting elected to Congress is much different. So if you go back, let's say 20 years ago, the type of person getting elected to Congress was a local business leader, a local attorney, somebody who had standing inside of the community that was generally looked at as kind of a middle-of-the-road figure that was there representing their community. What we see now are people getting elected on single issues. Oftentimes they're simply activists. They're not necessarily community figures that really understand their entire community. And they oftentimes have no clue how a small business works. They're not coming from that background. So our challenge is not just to explain how a franchise business works, but even sometimes how business works, why it's important. I mean, I guess the big hurdle we face are people think that some business owners just making this mass amount of profits and they're just stashing it in the bank somewhere, and they don't realize that when a hotelier makes money, guess what they do? They go open a new hotel. And when they go open a new hotel, that means hiring more people, creating more opportunity, creating that marketplace so that travelers have a better place to stay. And we're having to explain that story now like we've never had to in the past.
Right.
And that's scary.
That's interesting because, I do see a kind of schism that's happening in society in general, and it is reflected, obviously, in politics. And so face forward. So it's interesting to me that that a lot of these representatives don't understand how little money actually flows to the bottom line in a lot of circumstances, especially because you're taking care of all of those people in your community. So that's an essential thing for you to be able to get out there.
Well, let's be real clear about it. The amount of money that flows out into the various levels of government, no, if you're just talking about state taxes, whether it be property taxes, sales taxes, occupancy taxes, payroll taxes, that dwarfs the amount of profit that the owner of the business, the risk taker, ultimately receives. But he or she that receives that profit, they are reinvesting it back into the business. They're hiring more people. We're seeing wages go up, particularly in our industry.
5% in the last year or something like that.
Yeah, wages in the hospitality industry are accelerating at a pace much faster than just about every industry. So the suggestion by some lawmakers that our industry is not taking care of our workers, the facts tell a completely different story. And that's the challenge sometimes, is we see lawmakers who would rather legislate based on theories, based on emotions, as opposed to facts. And we need to get those facts out there and tell our story.
So let's get a couple of facts out there. And for you listeners, I did a whole politics-focused episode when I was at the Legislative Action Summit a couple of weeks ago, but it is worth getting out some of those numbers again. I think you're going to correct me because I'm sure this number's at the tip of your tongue. In terms of taxes, what was it, $187 billion yearly or something like that?
Yeah, and that's just looking at one section of taxes. When you start adding in payroll, sales, occupancy, property, it dwarfs that. It goes in much higher. But I think the key figure that we just had come out from Oxford Economics just a couple of weeks ago is that 1 in every 25 jobs in America is part of the hotel industry.
Right.
That is astounding. About 8.5 million people are employed. And by the way, there's about 1 million jobs that are open right now. So that number could go as high as 9.5 million people.
That is incredible. And then in terms of travel and tourism, I think the number is like 1 in 8, 1 or 9 jobs are supported by that. And that's when you start including restaurants and all of the money that people spend within local communities. Absolutely fascinating. So I don't necessarily want to get into all the individual issues that you guys are thinking about these days and the messaging you're trying to get across. And for you listeners, I highly encourage you to listen to that episode of the No Vacancy podcast, or check out an episode I did with Anthony Melchiori on our Checking In show, where we go through all of the major issues that were addressed at the Legislative Action Summit. So what I do want to talk to you today is about one very serious issue that I think has really come into the fore a lot because of what you've been doing, and that's the whole notion of preventing human trafficking, an issue that nobody at all talked about, considered, wasn't on the radar 3-4 years ago, and now it's at the tip of everybody's tongue, and guys like you are making this movement happen.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm helping it, but there are 1 million soldiers out there making it happen every single day. And it is so critically important. If you think about global trafficking, and we're talking about a number that some estimates put as high as 40 million people, that's the size of California. So if you think about it in this context, just ask yourself, do you know anybody from California? Well, if you do, then statistically, you probably know someone who's been involved in trafficking. That's how scary it is. So it's a multi-billion-dollar global business, the selling of human beings. It's sickening. And we as an industry are now taking a lead, and I'm proud to be part of that. And the industry should be part of that. There are brands across the board, whether it be Marriott, Hilton, IHG, Red Roof, G6, I could go on and on and on, Wyndham. I mean, they are making a difference because they're engaged now in helping to train all the employees. And our goal, just so you know, and this is when you start these campaigns, I mean, you think about the campaigns you've been involved with. Typically, there's a goal, there's a plan, and once you reach the goal, the campaign comes to an end, and you move on to the next campaign. This particular campaign, there really is no end, because the goal is this: that every employee at every hotel in the United States of America will be trained to identify human trafficking and trained to know what to do with that information. And when that is your goal, realizing that there are millions of people moving in and out of our industry at all times, you realize that this campaign will never end. But it is the right thing to do. We want traffickers to understand that their sick, demented practices will not happen in hotels. And if they walk into a hotel, there are going to be eyes on them. There are going to be people that see what they're doing, and they're going to contact law enforcement. We want that message to be spread loud and clear.
Right. So let's break this down a little bit. And I think it's important for everybody out there to understand that this is not a phenomenon at quote-unquote flea bag hotels. It happens with every hotel in the country in every single category, from high-end luxury down to the budget and economy level. So what are some of the things that people should be thinking about when they come when there's a I'm sorry, I'm not phrasing that. What are some of the things that people should be looking for to make sure that they are not contributing to the problem, but actually actively preventing the issue?
That is a great question, because I think there's really a couple of ways you can do this from a traveler standpoint and from an employer standpoint. One of the things we're encouraging is that employers put policies in for their businesses that would strike at this as well. Look, if your employer has a policy that you're not going to be spending your time going to certain establishments, and that if you get caught involved in things like this, that you're that you're fired, that's going to straighten people up to begin with. That we can start going after the demand side of this. The second part of that is, how do we make it uncomfortable for someone to do this in a hotel? Because if they're not able to do it in a hotel, where are they going to go to do it? And the more places that join us in making it uncomfortable, whether it's in taxi cabs, there's a big movement in the taxi cab industry to help slow this down, and Uber and Lyft have been joining on this with ride sharing. The airlines have done this. We've actually seen instances where where flight attendants have been able to see something and save people.
Right.
So,
I do want to talk about the airline thing for a moment, because what I've seen is a lot of posters, for example, in airports coming out, because people don't realize that a lot of these individuals are being brought into the United States on airplanes and going through customs that way.
Absolutely, that is happening. The airport that I'm most frequent and is the busiest in the world, Atlanta, when you get on the train in Atlanta, you hear it every single time. Another thing to keep in mind, and this is something that all parents should remember, is that if your vision of human trafficking is that your 12-year-old daughter is somehow abducted, that's not what human trafficking is today. In fact, what we see is that most of the young people that get involved in this are doing so because of their connections through social media. So when your children are sitting on the couch at home, engaging in social media, they are susceptible to being entrapped into this lifestyle. That's where it's happening.
That's pretty scary.
And as parents, we got to stop that.
How does that work? Because obviously someone's not getting on, hey, underage person, I want to buy you. That's not what's happening. So what is the messaging that these children are, or even adults, are being subjected to, that they think it's something other than what it really is?
Well, look, they begin to lure them in under false pretenses. First of all, they will lure them in on the things that person may be looking for. If it's a young girl and she doesn't have a relationship with her father, and now this guy wants to step in and kind of be the father figure, he'll figure that out quickly. If they are interested in things like narcotics or alcohol or things like that, they'll get them hooked on those things immediately, because that's how they build that relationship and become that source. If it's a young person, and I have a 14-year-old daughter, and the thought of her, and she wants to grow up as quickly as she can. If she is, or any young girl like that is now being attracted to older men, and they begin to prey on that. Those are the things you have to look out for, and that's happening on social media. It's not happening all the time in your school. People aren't necessarily being abducted for this. And social media is where the challenge is. Right.
So think about it. You are comfortable perhaps in your upper middle class lifestyle, and it is not something that is only subject to people, say, in poor countries coming over. It could happen to your children.
Absolutely. It knows no race. It knows no gender, interestingly enough. Boys are susceptible to this as well.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me.
It knows no age. It knows no income bracket. It knows no nationality. It's an evil crime that permeates the entire globe. And if we can do something to help stop it here in the United States in the hotel industry, and then be the catalyst for other industries to follow us, then we've done something pretty special.
Yeah, you really are. And I'm just so incredibly impressed that there's an issue that was out there that nobody was thinking about just a few years ago, that is now on everybody's lips that I speak to in the hospitality industry. I want to congratulate you on that great ad that you did on the human trafficking cause.
Thank you. And if you go to our website, AHLA.com, you can see that and many other things. We have even have a toolkit. We have everything we can do to help you there. And we have all sorts of great partners like Polaris and ECPAT that are out there fighting this fight alongside of us, because we can't do it alone. It's too big.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So how does the whole thing work? If I'm a hotel owner, operator, manager, and I want to make sure that my staff houses proper training, how do I tap into your resources, and what are those resources like practically when I bring them to my property? What's that process like?
Well, we have the resources online. We have a lot of partners that we work with as well, like our friends from AHLA who have these resources. So there's no limit really to the number of resources that are out there, but we do need to make sure that the training is uniform across the board. What we don't want to have happen is certain brands doing it, other brands not doing it. We don't want there to be this idea that only branded hotels are doing it and independent hotels are not doing it. So we want to make sure that it's uniform. We want to make sure that the training keeps up with the times so that there are always going to be best practices.
Right.
And what we're doing is at AHLA is kind of being the connector between all those organizations doing this, and how do we make sure that the best practices are being understood and then redistributed back out to those who are offering the training. Because what we're seeing is a lot of brands are saying, we know we need to do this, we've begun doing it, but we're still kind of green at this. I mean, this is new for many people. And so how do we know that what we're doing is the best way to attack this problem? And we want to be the resource to make sure that those best practices are being distributed to everybody.
So just to give us an example of one or two telltale signs that this might be happening under your roof at your hotel.
So the interesting thing about human trafficking is there's a long list of signs, but if you only pick one or two,
right,
it could be a completely innocent situation. What you're looking for is a prevalence of a number of these issues. So if there's a huge age disparity between the two people that are there, if the person looks in some way that they've been abused in any way, if they have scars or bumps or bruises, if they are avoiding security cameras, right? What type of payment are they making? Are they making
people that are trying to pay cash? It's
right.
more.
Is the cell phone that person gave you, is it actually a working cell phone? And this is a key one, do you see young females coming in and out of the hotel at late hours at night on a repeated basis again and again and again? Are they preventing you from going into the room and checking the room for an elongated period of time, many days? What's happening inside that room? I mean, you can see a lot of signs inside a room that maybe lead you to believe that. Each one of these individually is not going to be a sign of human trafficking, but when you begin to piece them all together, then you've got to be concerned. And what we encourage everybody, and it's part of the training to do, is to know how to contact law enforcement and share that information, because we don't want you taking it into your own hands. Oftentimes what law enforcement is doing is they're working against some of these child prostitution rings, and they may be building a case for months and months and months, and we don't want you to mess that up. But if you share that information with them, you can be the person that helps bring that case to a conclusion.
So let me play devil's advocate for a second. What if I'm just not sure and I'm afraid that I'm going to make a mistake and report an innocent person to the police?
The best thing to do is report it to police and let them worry about that, because they are trained to know whether those are true signs, whether that person is somebody of interest to them. We have not heard I've not heard any cases, and I can't imagine there are many out there, where someone in our industry reported something to law enforcement and then law enforcement went and apprehended the wrong person.
Right.
We just haven't heard that.
Right. That's great. Now, all of these toolkits and stuff, they're complimentary, I believe?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's one of the things we've committed to is goal number one is making sure every employee in the entire country in hospitality or in hotels are trained. And goal number two is to make it all free. I mean, it's going to cost us money.
Right.
And we're okay with that, because this issue is that important. We want to lead on this issue and do the right thing. So we will make those resources free to everybody.
My guess is that, it's not just like coming out of your personal bank account. Some of the major hotel brands are probably helping in terms of funding this as well.
Well, we have great support from all of our brands across the board. And yes, many of them have stepped up and they're doing what it takes to help us lead on this. And, a good portion, of course, is coming out of the AHLA budget, but that's fine. I'm not worried about that.
Well, this is such an important issue. Why would you be worried about that, right? If you could save lives and make a difference, that's really all that matters. So have you seen any real results at this point, now that we're a couple of years in and talking about this?
Absolutely. We have seen multiple stories of hotel employees reacting to something that they've seen that then, upon contacting law enforcement, resulted in arrests and prosecutions of people that are involved in human trafficking. It's interesting. We were meeting just a few weeks ago at the U.S. Department of Justice, and we were meeting with our human trafficking department. And while we were in the meeting, one of the officers that was there stood up and she left, and she came back in and she said, we just arrested a guy in Northwest Washington, D.C. that had been involved in this. We've been tracking this guy and his ring of people for over a year.
Wow.
And that arrest happened while we were there. And it's sad because it's understanding that that's going on, but I was also very happy that they got the guy, right? And you see that happening all across the country.
I really hope that you guys have a lot more success with this, because it's such an important issue. And for all of you folks out there, it can be happening under your nose. And look, it's not your fault. These guys are really clever. They have been practicing this and perfecting their routines for years and years and years. So even if it's happening under your hotel, don't worry about it. Contact the police. Look out for the telltale signs. Tap into the resource from the AHLA and their good friends over at AHLA, and make sure that you're doing absolutely everything you can to stop this scourge from happening ever again to some innocent children and adults that are out there. Any final thoughts on this particular topic?
I could not have said it better myself. Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Whew, I'm glad I got through that last statement. So, any other thoughts that you have about what's going on at the AHLA?
Really, at AHLA, everything's going great. We've had some amazing success in recent days. Just had a new funding model go through that was unanimously approved by our board. That's going to offer more resources for us to attack the issues to help both protect and promote the industry. But as the industry, as we enter into this kind of phase of where our economy is, there's a lot of naysayers out there. A lot of people you hear. What is the nabombs of negativity? Oftentimes, I'm actually still very positive. I think that the structural foundation of the economy is still in a good place. You have low interest rates, which makes borrowing money. You have consumers who are being paid higher wages than they've ever been paid before. Unemployment is at historic lows. Gasoline prices remain at a almost like a flat rate for going on about 6 or 7 years here. The cost of travel is less. It's easier in many cases getting in and out of airports because some of the technology that's being used. And so the ability to travel, the resources there to travel, and people's desire to travel has been great domestically. So I think we're really in a good position for this positive growth of our industry to continue. I'm not one of those people that's looking at the glass half full. Are there challenges? There's no question about it.
Well, that's kind of like life, right?
Exactly. But the industry is strong. There's good people in it. And I think we're going to continue to grow.
Well, that's excellent. So how do people get involved in the AHLA?
You can call me. No, you can call me. But just go to our website. We have all of our resources there. We are obviously a national organization. We work with all of our partner state associations as well. But we encourage people to get involved, because when we tell our story, when hoteliers and people in our industry are able to communicate to lawmakers at the city level, the county level, the state level, or the federal government, when we tell that story, good things happen. When we sit back and allow policies to be dictated to us with no influence on that process, then that's when we find ourselves in trouble. And so if we want this to continue, we want to continue to grow these jobs and create this opportunity, people must get involved. And the last thing, and if anyone takes any message away from this, and that is, don't look around and wonder who else is getting involved. You get involved, right? Don't let someone else do what you should be doing. Become involved. Help us protect and promote our industry.
And I'll tell you what, it's extremely emotionally satisfying to know that you're in there and you're helping make a decision. I saw how freaking cool it was at that Legislative Action Summit that citizens were talking with elected officials and they were able to affect change. There's nothing more exciting, there's nothing more powerful than doing that and having your voice heard. And you can do it by being a member of the American Hotel and Lodging Association. Chip, I want to thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Glenn. Always good to be here.
Always good for you to be here. Man, that was a lot of fun talking to him in our first official interview as him running the AHLA. So I want to thank you guys for listening, and I'll be back next week. That is, unless I decide to go camp up on Capitol Hill and get my congressman to finally listen to what I have to say. But I'm not too hopeful about that. See you guys next week.
Thanks so much for listening to No Vacancy, the hospitality industry's #1 podcast, with your host, Glenn Hausman, online at rouse.media, on Twitter at Traveling Glenn, and on Facebook.com/Glenn.Hausman. We'll catch you next time.